Hey everybody, welcome to the video. And yes, once again, no empty room in the background here. Still in Ohio. I'll be back in Florida tomorrow to hopefully get up the lineup building and court plays video. But this one we are talking final picks for week 12 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. I usually say it's a more finalized and polished version of the first look, but with the Thanksgiving slate, was not able to do that. So it's really kind of like a hybrid first look and final look here. But if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. It's just the end of the month. If you do want to sign up, you can get this last week for free if you do want to try it out, as long as you stay signed up on December 1st. We have NBA and the NFL going on currently. Then MLB and NASCAR once those seasons start back up again. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. Just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new, sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. Super fun to play over there. I play on it in addition to DraftKings each and every single week, and it is an absolute blast. And they have some pretty soft lines to take advantage of, so I do highly recommend it. With that being said, I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I will say this is not the deepest quarterback slate in the world. The most expensive guy here is Tom Brady at $7,600. Not just who I have listed, but on the entire slate at the quarterback position, because we are missing some pretty heavy hitters like Josh Allen, Dak Prescott that just played a few hours ago. No Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray's on the slate due to a bye week, so we are missing several big names. So I don't think this is the deepest position, but no matter which price range you want to go to, whether it be up top, right in the middle, or down low, I do think we have some pretty viable options. So we'll start with the two heavy hitters first in Tom Brady and Jalen Hurts. Tom Brady, $7,600. I think you can pretty much play him in every format. I would lean more towards tournaments just because we have Jalen Hurts with the rushing upside, which always feels a little bit better in cash games. But Tom Brady's in a great spot versus the Colts. This game features a pretty healthy 51.5 point over-under, only a 3-point spread, over a 27-point implied team total for Brady here in the Bucks. Nearly 320 passing yards and 3 passing touchdowns per game. They throw the ball a ton, nearly 40 times, 7.5 yards per attempt. Obviously, no rushing upside with Tom Brady, even though he kind of looked like a wounded giraffe running that ball. I think, what was it, like a 7-yard run he had on Monday night versus the Giants? That's the farthest I've seen him run in a while. But this is a great spot versus the Colts. They're terrible defensively, especially versus the pass, allowing the 5th most points rating of the quarterbacks and their 23rd DVOA. So like Tom Brady a lot, great opens to get the ball to, easy to stack him up with because his pass catching options are never super expensive. Like Chris Godwin, low 7K range, or maybe even upper 6K. I'd have to double check his price, but it's not that expensive. Mike Evans isn't very expensive, although he is currently questionable. Still no Antonio Brown. Rob Gronkowski is not that expensive either. Like, it's not hard at all to make Tom Brady stacks, and they typically do well each and every single week. So loving Brady in all formats here. Jalen Hurts ran the ball 18 times last week, and he had nearly 30 DraftKings points, I think just above that. And this is a great spot versus the New York Giants, just absolutely awful defense. Tom Brady just pieced them last week, and 22nd versus quarterbacks, despite being 11th DVA versus the pass. But Jalen Hurts with his rushing upside always makes him a super safe option. I kind of got away from playing Jalen Hurts for a while just because just the way he was priced, the way the matchups laid out, and the other options we had just didn't really make me land on Jalen Hurts too often. But I can see him being very popular this weekend, could end up being the popular cash game quarterback. And it's really just due to the rushing upside. He's averaging nearly 60 rushing yards per game, which is kind of like a built-in 1.5, 2 passing touchdown floor once you equate that to just passing yards. But hard not to like Jalen Hurts if he's going to run the ball double-digit times and always going to be a threat on the red zone. So like him in all formats here, and just hard not to like the matchup versus the New York Giants. Justin Herbert just seems too cheap. Just got done having a fantastic game versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, who typically have a decent defense, although I will say they were missing a lot of guys defensively that week. But still, Justin Herbert, with his kind of upside ceiling, he had nearly 100 rushing yards versus the Steelers. Not saying that's going to happen again, but the rushing upside is there for him. But he's got Keenan Allen, Jared Cook, Mike Williams to get the ball to, and some other offensive pieces like Austin Eckler as well out of the backfield. But $6,600 just seems too cheap for me. I don't love the matchup here versus the Broncos. They do have a solid defensive unit at times, although they're still 16th DVA versus the pass. But they're allowing the 4th fewest points beginning of the quarterback position. But I take talent over matchups any single day. And if Justin Herbert, just because the matchup versus the Broncos, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like super soft. Like, I don't think it's going to steer you away. Like, we all played Dak Prescott that one week versus the Denver Broncos. Well, not all of us, but we did have a lot of Cowboy stacks that week and didn't really stop us there. And Justin Herbert, I think, will be just fine. Like, he's too cheap, in my opinion, for the upside that he offers you. So I think he's an excellent tournament target. And if you want to play him in cash games, I think you could get away with that. I'm not done yet updating my ownership because we had the Thanksgiving Day slate, so that's going to keep me a little bit behind on that, but I could see Justin Herbert carrying some ownership at that price point because really, I mean, yeah, matchups like, yeah, I'm not like in love with playing the Broncos, but at that price point, it's really hard to beat. And then two cheapies here in Cam Newton, Tyrod Taylor. It's mainly just because of the matchups that they're in. Cam Newton gets a soft spot here versus the Miami Dolphins, who have not been very good versus the pass so far this season, and quarterbacks. Kind of mid-pack DVOA, but 27th versus quarterbacks, nearly 300 passing yards per game. I'm not really playing Cam Newton because of his passing ability. Like, I think he can probably throw a touchdown or two, hopefully. But it's mainly just the rushing floor for me, and he's always going to be a threat to score touchdowns around the goal line, only $5,600. He's been fantasy friendly the past 2 weeks. I know he didn't start the 1 week versus the Cardinals, but he did start last week and had a decent fantasy outing, and he's only $5,600, so you really can't ask for too much here. And Tyrod Taylor gets a good spot versus the Jets. They've been worse versus the run this year, like absolutely awful versus the run, but still on a defense I would be too scared of using a quarterback against. He's only $5,300. Guys similar to Cam Newton also has some rushing upside. So if you just want a cheap quarterback to load up on these studs like Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, or CMC on the slate, I totally understand wanting to go down low. And then moving on to the running backs, I think there's many ways we can get. It's going to depend on your roster construction. If you're spending top dollar for quarterback wide receiver stacks, I have to try to find some value running backs. And if you're going cheap with the guys like Cam Newton, Tyrod Taylor, you might be able to squeeze in some guys like Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, or CMC on this slate. So we'll start up top. Yes, I know there's no Jonathan Taylor here, which might be stupid because he's on an absolute tear, having like one of the best month or two stretches I have ever seen from a running back. Like, he's absolutely killing it. Had 5 touchdowns last week. He gets a really tough spot versus Tampa's defense, and I could see that being more of a game where the Colts have to throw the ball more than they'd like to. I thought that last week versus the Bills, although Jonathan Taylor was a lot less expensive than he was, considering he's over $9,000 this week, and I'd rather play CMC with that pass-catching upside. He has such a high floor. He gets a great spot versus Miami. I know Cam Newton can always vulture rushing touchdowns, which really sucks, but, I mean, on the season, we're probably getting around close to 20 carries, 15, 20 carries out of CMC in this game, and probably close to 10 targets. Just really hard to pass that up. And also, the Dolphins started out the season awful versus running backs. They've gotten a little bit better, but they've gotten worse versus the pass. But they're still 16th versus running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed per game, and 14th DVA versus the run, and allowing over 5 catches per game to running backs. CMC, he is matchup proof. If you had the money for CMC, one of the top options on the entire slate. Leonard Fournette, I think, is a good tournament option here because everyone's going to be on the passing attack for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but don't forget, Leonard Fournette is quite involved in the passing game, but the Colts are a bit of a pass-funnel defense, because if you look at their numbers this season versus the running back position, second DVA versus the run, and allowing the second fewest points per game to the position, just really not giving up much of anything, like barely over a quarter of a rushing touchdown per game, and not even 80 rushing yards, and still not really even getting beat up in the passing game too much, but Leonard Fournette has over 12% target share in this offense, nearly 6 targets per game, which is very good for running back, especially on a team that throws the ball around 40 times per game to still have nearly a 13% target share. Should hopefully get around 15 carries in this game, maybe more just depending on game script. But Leonard Fournette, at this price point, being the RB1 for the team that has the current highest implied team total in the slate, hard not to like Lenny here. I mean, everyone's going to be in the passing attack, so if you just want low ownership for a good running back that gets a lot of touches and volume, and a good chunk of that coming through the passing game, I think it's definitely a very good low ownership spot. Saquon Barkley, $6,300, questionable, but you have to assume he's going to play. It's just, I never feels great playing Barkley. I saw a stat that he and Baker Mayfield, the last however so many rushing attempts, they both had the same yards per attempt, which it was kind of shocking to see. I mean, yeah, I know quarterbacks typically have higher yards per attempt because they don't run the ball as much, but still, it was over the same exact sample size and same amount of rushing attempts, which I don't know, just kind of blew my mind a little bit. But Saquon Barkley, the only reason I'm playing Saquon is because of his pass catching upside, just because he gets a lot of dump offs. And Philly has been terrible versus pass catching running backs this season. If you're looking specifically what they've done in the receiving game versus running backs this year, nearly 7 catches per game, which is fantastic. If Saquon Barkley gets me like 6 to 8 catches in this game at $6,300, he's probably hitting value, assuming he can get more than like 40 or 50 rushing yards and hopefully falling into the end zone. But the Eagles, even versus the run, they've been bad too, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. 24th versus running backs, 20th DVA versus the run, allowing over 27 DraftKings points per game. So I think Barkley is firmly in play in any format. James Robinson currently questionable. If he's good to go, $6,200 versus Atlanta's defense. That's been terrible versus running backs this year, allowing the 4th most points per game and over 50 receiving yards. I think Robinson would firmly be in play, but just make sure you check the injury reports throughout the week. And with Thanksgiving going on, injury reports are kind of wacky right now because a lot of guys, there were some estimations and things like that, but hopefully he is good to go, and if he is, he does grade out pretty well point per dollar wise. AJ Dillon is the biggest question mark this week because we do not know if Aaron Jones is going to play. We'll see if he plays or not. If he plays, we can't play AJ Dillon with confidence at nearly $6,000. But if he happens to be out, we saw AJ Dillon get some really good usage on Sunday. He didn't really do a lot with it. Only had 15, 16 DraftKings points, which is a little bit disappointing. But he was getting targets. Like, he'll be used as a 3-down running back. Like, he's going to get all the touches. And if he does, $1,500 matchup versus the Rams. I mean, I wouldn't say it's the softest matchup out there, but that should be a pretty high-scoring game. I'm actually kind of surprised it's only sitting at 48 points right now. It's only a 1-point spread. It should be back and forth. I'm definitely looking forward to this game. It's at the 4:25 time slot, and then Green Bay versus the Rams, Matthew Stafford versus Rodgers, Cooper Kupp versus Devontae Adams. That should be a pretty fun game. I am looking forward to it. So I do want some exposure to it. And AJ Dillon, if he does happen to get the starting role here, really hard not to like him with that price point, especially with his involvement in the passing game that we saw. Darrell Henderson, $5,800. Just the RB1 for the Rams, gets the majority of the touches, facing Green Bay, who just really doesn't have a great run defense. They haven't for a couple of years now. 24th DVA versus the run. They're not bad fantasy points-wise, considering they're allowing the 8th fewest points per game and only 75 rushing yards. But it would still be hard not to like Henderson here. He should see 15-plus touches. He's always a threat around the red zone. He's involved in the passing game, nearly 4 targets per game. $5,800 to discard at point per otherwise, and what should be a decently high-scoring game. Then Miles Sanders, $5,100. Wasn't a great fantasy day for him, but he did have decent volume and nearly 100 rushing yards. Just didn't get involved in the passing game and not get to the end zone, but he still had 94 rushing yards and over 15 carries. $5,100. He's cheap. Good matchup versus the Giants. If he can fall into the end zone, great. If not, I'm not sure we'll be super excited, but I do like that price point quite a bit. The problem is if you're playing Jalen Hurts, probably not the best idea to play Miles Sanders with him because it just doesn't correlate that well. Moving on to the wide receiver position, I try to keep this as simple as possible because it really just depends on what game stacks you're looking at, what run back options do you have to those game stacks or stacks that you're using with your quarterback. But in cash games, you can handpick these guys as one-offs, as the best point per dollar options. That's totally fine. You don't need correlation in cash games all the time. Although if you are using a statue quarterback like Tom Brady, they're not going to get there just by themselves. One of their pass-catching options has to have a good game because Tom Brady's not going to get you through rushing touchdowns and 70 rushing yards. Jalen Hurts, he can do that. You don't need Devonta Smith with Jalen Hurts. Like Hurts, we've seen have games where he has like 112 passing yards, but you have like 80 yards and a touchdown or 2 on the ground, which means his wide receivers were probably useless, but he's still a great fantasy game just because of his legs. Guys like Tom Brady, Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott might be the best example because he is mobile, but he doesn't really run the ball too much. But I think you guys get the idea here. So if you're using the Rams or the Packers, you're stacking that game up. Or you could just one-off Cooper Kupp. Like some guys that just get massive volume like Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen. You can use them as one-offs in cash games, or just even guys that are cheap and good matchups and are just for the volume they get are just too cheap and pumped. Otherwise, they make too much sense on DraftKings. I think you guys get the idea there. But Cooper Kupp, pretty much the best player in football this season for fantasy. Or I guess Jonathan Taylor's right up there with him. But Cooper Kupp's been absolutely annihilating defenses. Good spot versus Green Bay. Should be pretty high scoring. He has a late start. I would be pretty scared if I don't have a lot of players going in the 4:25 or the 4 p.m. games because there's some good teams playing with lots of good fantasy options. Devontae Adams on the opposite side of this game. He's one of those guys, like him and Cooper Kupp, you don't need to play their quarterbacks all the time. Like, yeah, I would like to play Matthew Stafford with Cooper Kupp, but Cooper Kupp could just get 35 points and you don't need Matthew Stafford. But as far as Aaron Rodgers goes, I don't really like playing Aaron Rodgers in DFS too much. I know last week he was obviously fantastic, had multiple passing touchdowns, absolutely killed it. But Devontae Adams, typically, he just soaks up all of Aaron Rodgers' points. I don't typically play Aaron Rodgers too much. I just play Devontae Adams to get the points there. But he's obviously a fantastic option. He's $1,000 cheaper than Cooper Kupp, so even though Kupp has been fantastic this year, Devontae Adams will grade out just a little bit better just because he's like $1,000 cheaper. And if you're looking at the numbers this year, I mean, they're not too far off. Adams is close to 100 receiving yards per game, 10.5 targets, 33.8% target share. Deebo Samuel has been amazing this season, $7,900. He has a fantastic matchup this weekend versus the Minnesota Vikings, who just got absolutely torched by Devontae Adams last weekend. So if you want to play Deebo as a kind of like a pivot option, because Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams will have ownership this weekend, and the guys below them like Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, just because they're going to be part of stacks with guys like Justin Herbert and Tom Brady. So Deebo Samuel, no one wants to play Jimmy Garoppolo on the slate, which I totally understand. And they're allowing the second most points per game to the wide receiver position. So I like Deebo Samuel as a one-off in tournaments. Keenan Allen, if you're just stacking up with Justin Herbert, you could use him and Mike Williams. Mike Williams is considerably cheaper. Both guys went off on Sunday night. Chris Godwin, one of my favorite plays in the entire slate. The Colts have just been absolutely awful versus wide receivers this season. High-scoring game, close spread. Mike Evans is currently questionable. If he happened to be out, Chris Godwin would be a lock at $7,000. He also grades out right now is one of the best pump dollar options on the entire slate of the position, despite being $7,000. Deontay Johnson facing the Bengals. They are 21st DVA versus the pass. Even though they're not giving up a lot of points per game, two wide receivers, but the volume's kind of hard to pass up for a guy like Deontay at that price point. Never pretty playing any Steelers players just because the offense is pretty gross, but on the season, he's got nearly a 40% market share of the team's air yards, nearly 10.5 targets per game, and close to a 30% target share. DJ Moore, Cam Newton's one of those guys you don't have to use a pass catching option with him just because of the rushing upside, but DJ Moore is cheap and gets a great spot versus the Dolphins, who are currently allowing the third most points per game to the position in nearly 44 DraftKings points per game. So I do like DJ Moore at that price point. Also got into the end zone last week. Already talked about Mike Williams. He's a nice GPP option with Justin Herbert. Michael Pittman, I could see him being popular for cash games, and he's also the easy run back option if you're doing a bunch of buck stack. Like let's say you go Tom Brady, Chris Godwin, you're running back with Michael Pittman. We know the Buccaneers have not been good versus the pass or the wide receiver position so far this season. I mean, they're kind of mid-pack, but they're still not that great, and they really haven't all been that healthy either. But Pittman at $5,600, he didn't have a great week last week, but that's just because Jonathan Taylor absolutely took over the game, and it was a tough spot versus Buffalo. But on the season, Pittman getting nearly 7 targets per game, about 32% market share of the team's air yards, good spot versus Tampa, and they should be trailing this game. Hopefully, just if you're playing Pittman, you hope they're trailing, because if not, they'll just run Jonathan Taylor into the ground. But I do think it's a great spot for Pittman. Then after that, we have a couple cheapies here. We have Jacoby Myers at $5,000, Corey Davis at $4,800. Jacoby Myers, maybe a fringe cash play just because they're facing Tennessee and they get destroyed by wide receivers every single week, allowing the most points per game and 200 receiving yards. Plus, Mac Jones has looked pretty solid recently, and he's got around 7 targets per game on a 24% target share. Corey Davis, he's going to get Zach Wilson back. He's had some good games with Zach Wilson earlier in the season. Facing Houston, Houston will be a very, very popular defense this week, but Davis is averaging around 7 targets per game, half a receiving touchdown per game, and close to a 20% target share. It's not pretty, but at his price point, he does have some upside, and his 8 out of 13.4 isn't terrible. And the Texans are 24th versus wide receivers this season. It's not pretty, but I think he's a fine, cheap option in tournaments if you want to just try to differentiate a little bit, and you're attacking a very popular defense as well. And moving on to the tight end position, I'm going to try to save a little bit of money here. I don't think I'm going to spend top dollar for guys like George Kittle or Kyle Pitts in the slate. We're also missing Darren Waller and Travis Kelce. So I think just kind of spending down a bit, spending our money more so at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver will probably make more sense to me. And Rob Gronkowski, we'll start with him, $4,400. If you're using Brady, he's just an easy pairing option with them. The Colts have been awful defensively versus tight ends, one of the worst teams in the league versus them. And Gronk, in the games he's played this year, has looked pretty good. He's quite involved in the offense. He actually looks kind of spry this year. Doesn't look that washed up. 50 receiving yards per game, nearly 4.5 catches, 6 targets, nearly a touchdown per game, 13.5% target share on a team that throws the ball around 40 times per game. Like that is totally fine by me. The Colts are on the 5th most points per game of the position on the 23rd DVA versus the pass. I think that Gronk price point looks fantastic. Muth here, $4,300, just consistent targets every single week. He's a rookie tight end, but he's certainly not playing like it. Some of these numbers are skewed just because he wasn't that involved earlier in the season, but the guy looks pretty darn good. I think this is definitely a fine spot versus Cincinnati Bengals. Dan Arnold, he goosed you last week, $4,000, but beforehand he was very involved in the offense, and it's just hard to see that happening once again. So I'm more than comfortable going back to Dan Arnold to find matchup here versus the Falcons, who are 30th DVA versus the pass. And just, keep in mind, before last week, Darren Arnold was getting consistent targets every single time. So assuming that doesn't happen again, hopefully they fix that and they get some more designed passes to him. I think Darren Arnold will be fine. Nice bounce back option there. Can't imagine his ownership will be too high just because people don't like going back to someone that was a decent play that just absolutely busted. Evan Ingram, $3,800. Philly has not been good versus tight ends. I don't really like Evan Ingram here, but I was running out of options, so I thought he was somewhat viable at $3,800, but not really too excited about playing Evan Ingram. But Jared Cook, $3,000. If you want to use Justin Herbert and get a really cheap pass catching option with them, Jared Cook is basically free here at $3,000. I don't think there's a good reason why he should be $3,000. Like, he's averaging nearly 5 targets per game, 13% target share, 35 receiving yards per game. He's always a throw around the red zone. Like, the guy is not a bad tight end. The Broncos are the best team in the league versus tight ends so far this year, so maybe DraftKings kind of factor that into the algorithm. But $3,000 for Jared Cook, like, he could easily score a touchdown, and if he does that, you'll be extremely happy at that price point. And as far as defenses go, I don't really want to spend any money on defenses this weekend, so I'm really just going to probably try to use some of these cheap options. And to be honest, I'm probably just going to end up playing the Texans here at $2,300 versus the Jets. That's kind of a freebie. I know the Texans defense isn't very good, but they're going to project very well in all projection systems. I know when I was playing with the optimizer, it just jams on 100% Texans defense. I don't fix any of the exposure settings. Whenever you can get dirt cheap defense facing the Jets. You just kind of had to take advantage of that. Plus, the Texans are playing at home, 2.5-point favorites. Like, it's kind of hard to pass up. Bengals playing the Steelers. Big Ben, I mean, never really scared about using a defense versus the Steelers. Falcons defense versus the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence is always good for some turnovers. They're slight favorites on the road, but 23-point implied team total, not too scared there. Nothing pretty, but just save some money, get some better studs in your lineup, go with some cheap defenses. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I do hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to check out Patreon and get access to some extra content, optimizers, ownership projections, cheat sheets, all that fun stuff, link can be found down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're a new sign over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPENN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it. I will stop rambling. I'll see you guys in the next video.